Welcome to our Sunday School lesson for Sunday, June 29th of 2025. We this quarter have been working our way sort of through Genesis, looking at a number of different altars that people made, and today is no exception. And then after today, we'll move into the New Testament and see the way that Jesus related to the temple and the altar there, and ultimately see how he becomes the temple in a sense, and also how we become the opportunity to be the living stones upon which Jesus' temple is made. But for today, we're going to continue in our story in Genesis. And you may remember last week we left off with Isaac essentially coming into his own, and I called last week Isaac the meek, and how his faithfulness was displayed in some ways in his meekness. Today we are going to look at Jacob, Isaac's son, and I'm choosing to call this lesson, and Jacob himself, Jacob the beloved rascal. And Rascal is almost too playful because he's not a very pleasant character in lots of ways, and we'll see that today. And yet he is beloved, and that's pretty amazing. And so let's just kind of do a little recap of his story so that we know where we are. Isaac and Rebekah, of course, are the parents of Jacob and Esau. And when they are born, they have conflict. Actually, even in the womb, they have conflict. And Rebekah complains that the twins, are fighting in her womb, and she even wonders, why do I have to put up with this? And when they are born, Esau is born first, but Jacob comes out holding Esau's heel, as if he's trying to supplant him, to pull him back in so that he can come out first. And the word Jacob literally means a supplanter or heel grabber. I like to kind of translate it to simple rascal, but again, it's not the good kind of rascal. It's actually the bad kind of rascal. Their conflict, of course, does not end in the womb or at birth. Later, Esau comes in from hunting, and he has apparently had a bad day, hadn't caught anything, and he is famished. And there is Jacob making a pot of lentil stew, and Esau says, I am just starving, please let me have some of that stew. And Jacob, the supplanter, the heel grabber, says, well, I'll sell it to you if you sell me your birthright. Now, birthright is essentially the inheritance, and so he's saying, if you sell me your inheritance, essentially letting me become the firstborn, and you would be the secondborn, and so as the firstborn, I would receive much, much more than inheritance. And Esau, in a moment of weakness, says, well, I'm starving to death, so what good will my inheritance do me years and years down the line? Sure, you can have my birthright. And so he sells it. Jacob essentially, he's always said that he tricks him. There's really no trick to it, except that Jacob takes advantage of him in a weak moment. And we've really seen this before, how in one moment of weakness, someone's life can be changed completely. We saw it first with Cain and Abel, where in a moment of weakness, Cain kills Abel, and his whole life is changed, as of course Abel's is, and Adam's and Eve's lives are changed as well. We see it with Sarah, when she kind of gives up on the promise that God will give her children, at least through her own body. And so she says to Abraham, well, take Hagar, my servant, and make a baby with Hagar, and then that baby can kind of become my baby. And then she discovers when the baby is born, even before the baby is born, that she regrets that decision. And there are implications, in some ways we can say, lasting to this day. And we talked about that a little bit last week, how Israel and Isaac and Ishmael are essentially the Jewish nation and the Arab nation. At least they symbolize those two things. So that one momentary bit of weakness had that effect for millennia even. Now we see Esau in a moment of weakness. He sells his birthright and really changes his life in lots of ways. And then, just before this morning's story happens, Rachel, the mother of Jacob and Esau, shows favoritism to Jacob. And oftentimes in Genesis we see this happening as well. We see this happening with Abraham and Sarah, of course. I mentioned that. We'll see this happen later with Joseph, whose father shows him favoritism, and the tremendous difficulties that causes. Rachel kind of talks Jacob into cheating Esau, not out of his birthright, he already had that, but now out of the blessing. And in that moment, everything changes for Jacob. Everything changes for Esau, and really for Rebekah and Isaac too, I suppose. Now, But what we also have been learning is that this one moment of sin that can come, that we can give into, the one moment of temptation, and we commit a sin that can change our lives as well, is not the end of our story. God doesn't give up on us, and God is still there for us. And as we've seen in some of these earlier stories, God even takes the horrible mistakes that we make and the consequences of those mistakes, and he can turn those even into blessings. But it's not the way that it could have been so much better if we would have followed God's will all along. So we're learning that. And we're getting there into this story then. So Jacob is now steals Esau's blessing. And let's talk a little bit about what that means. So the birthright is really like the inheritance. So if I said to my sister, I'm really, really hungry and I'll give you the inheritance. I can get written out of the will. I don't care. I just want to eat the meal that you've cooked. And we, kind of back then it was just a verbal thing. But if we signed up the legal documents and I wrote myself out of the will, then I wouldn't get the inheritance. The blessing was a little different. The blessing was where the father would essentially say to the oldest son, usually would give them a blessing, giving them in some ways priority over the rest of the family. The best way I can see this in the modern day is I'll never forget my father when his father died. His mother had died earlier. When his father died, my dad said to me, I really feel kind of the weight of this new generation is on me because I am now the next generation. There's nobody above me in a sense, and my father was the oldest child. There's a sense in which the blessing of the dad is conferring that weight, that responsibility, but also that opportunity to the next generation. And so when you get the blessing of the father, it really can't be revoked, and that was because they recognized in ways we probably should better these days, that when you say something you can't take it back, and when you give a blessing you can't just take it back. And so with Rebekah's help, Jacob cheats Esau now out of his blessing by lying to his father and getting his father to give the blessing to him, and it cannot be revoked. And so that's where we get to today. Jacob is now on the run because Esau does figure out a way to get both the birthright and the blessing back. How does he do that? Well, if he kills Jacob, Jacob will not be there to inherit. Jacob will not be a part of the next generation, and Esau will get those things back. And so he is going to kill Jacob. So Jacob takes off running, and he runs out, and Rachel sends him to her father's house, so her father's not there anymore, to her uncle, and says, go there to Haran. It's where she grew up. And so he's making his way there. He's running. You can imagine this is perhaps the first time in his whole life he's ever really been all by himself. And he has very little to take with him because he had to get out of there in a hurry. He has been surrounded by luxury and wealth his whole life, and now he has next to nothing. And when the sun sets, you have to stop. He didn't have a flashlight. They didn't have those in those days, and there were no street lights, no other lighting. And so when the sun stopped, he had to stop. And we kind of pick up the story there. So this is Genesis 28, verses 10 to 22. Jacob left Beersheba, and remember, Beersheba is the well of the oath, and that is Isaac's home. And he went toward Haran, and again, that is where Rebekah grew up. He came to a certain place and stayed there for the night because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones of the place, he put it under his head and lay down in that place. And he dreamed that there was a stairway set up on the earth, and the top of it reaching to heaven. And the angels of God were ascending and descending upon it. And the Lord stood beside him and said, I am the Lord, the God of Abraham, your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie I will give to you and to your offspring, and your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth, and you shall spread abroad to the west and to the east and to the north and to the south, and all the families of the earth shall be blessed in you and in your offspring. For know that I am with you, and will keep you wherever you go, and will bring you back to this land. For I will not leave you until I have done what I promised you. Then Jacob woke from his sleep and said, Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. And he was afraid and said, How awesome is this place! This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven. So Jacob rose early in the morning, and he took the stone that he had put under his head, and he set it up for a pillar, and he poured the oil on top of it. And he called the place Beth-El, but the name of the city was Luz at first. Then Jacob made a vow, saying, if God will be with me, and will keep me in this way that I go, and will give me bread to eat and clothing to wear, so that I may come again to my father's house in peace, then the Lord shall be my God. And this stone which I have set up for a pillar shall be God's house, and all that you give me, I will surely give 1/10 back to you. And so that is the story. Let's look at a few of the details there. I already mentioned that he has to stop because it gets dark, but surely he is still afraid that Esau is coming, and Esau is hunting him, and Esau is a hunter. And so you can imagine, as he lays down to sleep, it is going to be a very uneasy sleep. And it says that he uses a pillow, a rock, for his pillow. Now, nobody would actually use a rock and put their head on a pillow, I don't think, or as a pillow. That wouldn't be all that comfortable. Dr. Estes, who wrote our lesson, suggests that maybe it was a kind of an inclined slab of rock that he could kind of lay on so he wasn't completely down on the ground. A number of years ago, I went and did a hiking trip in the Grand Canyon. And my hiking buddies and I, I think it was 5 nights and 6 days that we were in the canyon. We quickly learned that the last place or last time that you want to be hiking is during the middle of the day, during the heat of the day. It was just unbelievably, almost unbearably hot. And we would find rocks that were casting shadows, and we would sit up next to those rocks and try to take naps during the heat of the day, and then would hike when it got a little bit cooler. And they were only kind of fitful naps because even in the shade of the rock, the sun was so hot. But I certainly would not have wanted to lay down in the middle of the heat, in the middle of the sun. There would have been no rest there whatsoever. There's a sense in which Jacob is lying down on this slab in the heat of the night, not the heat of the day, and not the literal heat, but the heat of worrying that maybe Esau is going to come and find him and do him in. And so he also is not going to be sleeping well at all. And yet, in spite of that, he has this amazing dream. And it is a dream first that he sees, it's sometimes translated as ladder, but this translation that I read, the New RSV, does a better job of translating as a staircase or a ramp that goes up to heaven. And angels are going up the ramp and down the ramp, and up the ramp and down the ramp. And interestingly, usually when people see angels, the angels have a message for them, but that's not what's going on here. And I wonder if perhaps this is just sort of the idea of angels being sent out on a mission and then returning home from their mission. So you can imagine when Gabriel is sent out to meet with Mary and just to share with Mary that she's going to be the mother of the Messiah. He comes down the ramp, and then when he's finished with that mission, he can go back up the ramp. That's kind of how I see it. But then there's a detail that we tend to miss, and that because we tend to think, well, God is up there somewhere at the top of the ramp. But it says that Jacob realizes the Lord is standing beside him. And that had to be incredibly startling and even terrifying for Jacob. Here he's on the run, trying to get away from his crime, get away from his brother who wants to kill him for his crime. And here is the judge of the entire universe standing next to him. This is not good news. He's in trouble now. And yet what we discover is that instead of getting punishment, he is given a promise. And he is first given that same greeting that we've heard before. We heard the greeting last week to Isaac, where God says, I am the God of your father Abraham. Now God says to Jacob, I am the God of your father Abraham and of Isaac. And as I mentioned last week, when God greets Moses, a millennia or so from then, he will say, I am the God of Abraham and of Isaac and of Jacob. Jacob gets included in that as well. And so we have in there the I am, the name of God, and the relationship. I am the God of Abraham and of Isaac, and by implication, I am your God as well. And then God repeats the promise to Jacob that I am going to make of you a great nation. And unlike, interestingly, with Isaac, he does mention or includes in there, and you will be, your people will be a blessing to all the nations of the earth. And that is where Genesis is ultimately going, even though the author doesn't realize it, because through the nation of Israel and the person of Jesus, all of the nations of earth will be blessed. Well, then God gives to Jacob a blessing that God has not given to Abraham nor to Isaac. And God says, I will not leave you. Not only am I standing here next to you where you are aware of my presence, but I will not leave you. Now, that promise is implied to the others, but here is the first time God actually says, I am ever present. I am always with you. And that's not a threat, although for someone like Jacob, it might sound like a threat. It's a promise and it is a blessing. Well, the next morning when he wakes up, he realizes he needs to mark this somehow. And so he takes that pillow, and here's how we know it's not just a pillow-sized rock, but it must be a fairly large rock. And he erects it up so that it is standing straight up and down. And who knows how long that took. And that's interesting in itself because he's not as worried about Esau as he was the night before. He wants to take the time to do this. And so he erects this rock and he pours oil on it and to consecrate it and to say that surely this is the house of God and the gateway to heaven. And he changes the name of the place from Luz to Beth-El. Now, Beth in Hebrew is house and El is God, Elohim. And so it is the house of God. Just of interest, Bethlehem is the house of bread, and how wonderful it is that the bread of life comes to us from the house of bread. But he names it Beth-El, the house of God. And how wonderful it is that he does that. And yet we see Jacob still has a ways to go. So God has made this promise. And we sometimes call it a covenant, but there's no covenant there. That God does not say, if you will be faithful, I will do this. God simply says, I am the Lord your God, and I'm going to give you this land, and I'm going to give you great offspring, and your offspring will be a blessing to all the nations. There's no conditional language in there at all. But look what Jacob does the next morning. Jacob, after he says, surely the Lord is in this place, and I'm going to name this place Beth-El, he says, if God will be with me and will keep me in this way that I go and will give me bread to eat and clothing to wear. Now, God didn't actually promise bread or clothing. He does promise, I'm going to sustain you because you're going to be a great nation. But Jacob's kind of adding on to it. I need a few things. I got to make sure we're good, God. So if you do these things, so that I may come again to my father's house in peace. Now, he and his mother are the one who wrecked the peace, but he's kind of now putting it on God. So you're going to have to find a way to bring me back to my father's house in peace. Then, he says, if you do those things, the Lord shall be my God. And this stone that I have set up for a pillar shall be God's house. It's almost like he says, you can't inhabit it. You can't take title to this unless I give it to you, which is ridiculous. It already is God's house, but he's kind of still throwing this conditional language. And then I think amazingly he says, and all that you give to me, I will surely give a tenth to you. I'm even going to kind of bribe you back. I realize everything I get, I'm getting from you, but I promise to give you some back, like God really needs it. So Jacob is still the supplanter. He's still the heel grabber. He's still the rascal. And yet how wonderful it is that God is patient with him. And God is going to make good on those promises in spite of how much of a rascal that Jacob can be. He's got a ways to go, but God doesn't give up on him. And that gives us great hope as well, because surely you and I recognize that we have a ways to go as well. And God isn't going to give up on us either. So what are some implications for this passage? Well, first, I'd like to mention that I guess you would call her my grandmother-in-law, my mother's paternal grandmother was Reese Landers. And there was a pastor in her life who actually was a very prominent pastor. You would know this person's name if I said it, who did some really unethical things that impacted her and her family. And rather than choosing to retaliate, she would always say when someone mentioned that pastor and knew that story and was mentioning that pastor in some kind of a negative way, isn't it wonderful that God uses us in spite of ourselves? She saw how God was using that pastor in spite of the things that he had done. And God does that for and with all of us. God uses us in spite of ourselves. And I see that happening so powerfully in the story of Jacob and in the story of this incredibly dysfunctional family of Abraham that remains dysfunctional throughout all of Genesis. God uses us in spite of ourselves. And so I think a few things we can be aware of. As with Cain, we need to be aware that sin is always crouching like a lion at the door. And if we let it in, we are inviting ourselves to be devoured. The consequences for our sin always impact us. They also impact other people. So Cain kills Abel. Obviously, that impacts Abel, but it also impacts Cain, and his life is changed. And so we have these opportunities in our lives to change our lives in a moment for the bad. And if we can have enough wisdom to recognize, if I do this, what are the longer term implications, we might be able to avoid some of those things. However, let us also recognize that every one of us is infinitely capable of messing up our lives. And we are all going to, in the heat of passion, in the heat of the moment, do things that we're going to later regret, things that may impact other people and may impact us. And we just need to recognize that. And yet we can be so thankful to know that God can and will still use us even when we do these things. And I find it wonderfully comforting to see that even when we find ourselves in a dysfunctional family, or if we cause our family to be dysfunctional, and all of us do that from time to time as well, God can use us and can use our families as well. It's wonderful to me that God makes promises to us even though we do not deserve them. There's nothing Jacob has done to deserve the promises that God is making to him, and yet God does make those promises. I'm going to make you a great nation. I'm going to be with you. I will be with you always. And your family will be a family that blesses all nations. He doesn't deserve that, but he gets it as a wonderful gift of grace. It is wonderful that God promises, I will never leave you. This is not a threat. This is a blessing. It is not a curse, but it is a gift that God gives to us. And God is always with us, guiding us, caring for us, loving us. And how wonderful that is. And we'd be wise to see that as the blessing it is. And then recognizing that God is patient with us, always seeking to help us grow, but being patient to us, helping us learn those difficult lessons that we cause upon ourselves when we are hard learners and we have to learn things the hard way. But God is still there for us, helping us, guiding us along, never giving up on us, no matter how much of a mess we've made of our lives. And then I think finally, we would be wise, as Jacob surely did, to look back to the Beth-Els in our lives. When was God with me? When did God bless me when I didn't deserve it? When did God teach me something that I needed to learn? And set up some of those pillars, if we will, to look back, because that will then help us move forward in faith. And surely that's one of the ways that Jacob was able to move forward, was to look back and remember, out there in the wilderness somewhere, there is a stone set up that is a stone that reminds me that God made promises to me. And even though I didn't get it and I tried to kind of bribe God back and make it all conditional, God didn't give up on me, and thanks be to God for that. We can look back at those Beth-Els in our lives and realize that God is still with us now and is bringing us forward into the future. So thanks be to God for the promise to Jacob. Thanks be to God for the promises God makes to us.